Hey, poetry students, I'm here with a quick video to walk you through one of your assignments, which is, I believe, the catalog poem worksheet and poem. But basically, I want to give you some strategies for writing catalog and list poems. And in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by helping you understand a little bit more of the specifics about list poems and then go to category poems. So they're very similar to one another. I just think that basically list poems can be a type of catalog poem, but not all catalog poems are list poems, if that makes sense. And we'll talk about some of the differences as well. But I also want to use those resources that I have posted for you online so that I'm kind of walking you through those. One of them, if I share my screen, get rid of that for a second. This is the list poem site that I'm having you read partly for homework. It's on the schedule. So when we're looking through this page, some of the typical parts of a list poem is that they literally start with the same words for each line that you're writing. Now, that can be anything, whatever you want it to be. Sometimes that can be when we're looking at examples like How, which is by the Ginsberg or by Allen Ginsberg. You'll notice that we've got I and then who. So it's the focus on the who, but then it changes, right, in certain parts as we look a little further down. If we keep scrolling, you'll notice that the second part of this poem, Moloch, right? Moloch, Moloch, Moloch. Then we get I'm with you, I'm with you, I'm with you. So that's an example of the way you would start a list poem. And what's interesting about Ginsberg too is that he's using some formatting to break lines as he goes through, so that it's not just literally every single line is starting with that exact same language. Instead, we get that language repeated over and over again in a useful way, but you still get to play with line breaks. And that's something you can do with list poems. If we look at the other one that I'm having you read, which is by Christopher Smart, you'll notice that this is somewhat of a true list poem in that it literally starts with 4 4 4 and it continues that all the way through the poem. Okay, we can think about list poems in a certain way, like I guess we could say scaffolding, right? You choose something to start each one of your lines with, and then you write lines accordingly, and you create some type of sequence, but you're using repetition to your advantage. That means that sounds are important, that means that specifics are important, that means that details are super important, the rhythm of your lines are also important. So all of these skills that we've been using up until now start to fit into the area of how to write a list poem. We bring all of those together and we go back to now we're starting to think about form of poems, and the list poem will basically start with the same word for each line, and it makes it a little bit difficult to keep your reader interested in these poems unless you're using some of those other skills like the web pages that I've linked you to are talking about. Some of those have to do with, engaging the senses, talking about concrete nouns, all those things that we had on the board a little bit ago. Now, if we start to think about how catalog poems fit into this, catalog poems generally are cataloging specific things, so very specific and detailed things, but not necessarily starting every single line the same. So this is how catalog poems diverge, so to speak, from list poems. And that would be that the lines are super important, but not because of the way they start, but because of the objects and the details that are within each line to create a list of things as you're going through. That can be a list of actions, it can be a list of emotions, it can be a list of people, it can be a list of places, ideas, tasks. So I've read catalog poems that literally walk through morning routines, right? That walk through the day of being, a soccer mom, that walk through the life of or the day of a professional athlete. All those types of things can be catalog poems, and it's you creating a list, a sequence of things that are being done, or emotions that you're feeling, or things that you're seeing, so that the reader begins to understand why you're cataloging. Okay. Um, Again, because we're getting a list of things, it can seem somewhat repetitive and somewhat derivative of, a note that's on your fridge. And so some people will ask, well, how is this poetry? And this is why we've got to switch back into some of those main skills that we're used to covering. And one of those is themes. So you've got to be thinking about theme as you move throughout your catalog poem. So when you're cataloging different things, when you are trying to fit them into a catalog poem, a list of things, you've got to start to ask yourself, what objects are you choosing? How are they related together? And are you using some of those primary tools like sounds, the senses, um, let's see here, repetition, rhythm? Are you engaging the emotions? Are you focusing on that larger theme? And we can go all the way back now to start thinking about nature poetry as well as narrative poetry, because through this list of things it may seem a little bit odd, but as you'll see on the web page for catalog poems, so let me share my screen with you here for a second. If we go back to the one, or if we go to the one for catalog poems, I mean, you'll see everything in here from um, creating lists of emotions to creating lists of body parts, right? To creating different types of fears, and really, I think that this is what defines, so to speak, a catalog poem, which is a tool to portray feelings, emotions, and ideas in a logical sequence. So, what is that sequence that you are walking your reader through? And that's part of the hard. That's part of the hard skill associated with list as well as catalog poems. So think to yourself when you start these, I'm going to have to be super specific about and super detailed as I go through. I need to be thinking about the five senses. I have to have a theme when I approach these. If I'm doing a list poem, I need to think about the words that I'm starting each line with and make sure that they're important enough to start each one of those lines with. You want to remember that in catalog poems, you're going to be using repetition, but especially with the catalog poems, you have a little bit more freedom in the way that they start, but it needs to be a list of things as you go through. Okay, so hopefully that helps walk through those web pages, shows you why they're important, and I'm having you read them, but also give you some tips as you begin to craft your own catalog poem and complete the assignment associated with this. Okay, thanks, guys. Stay brilliant.